Hello, I'm Jim Rambo, Senior Technical Trainer with the Google Search Appliance. Now we're going to talk about GSA Mirroring. For customers that have search as a critical component of their business, a hot standby or a hot backup is going to be critical for them. So we're going to show you how to set up the mirror. We're going to talk about its features and its benefits, and we'll talk about some caveats on it so that you get it set up properly. To begin with, a Replica is purchased from Google with a heavy discount, so you don't have to pay full price on the box. It can be used for high availability. Users, if you set up a load balancer in front of the two GSAs, they can both serve results. One of the GSAs will crawl. Okay, so what we're doing is the primary will crawl the content off of the web servers, build up the index, and it will pass its configuration as well as a copy of its index over to the Replica. This can also be useful in migration because you can upgrade the software on one GSA. Typically what you'll do is you'll disable the mirroring during the migration update. Check your documentation for details. Users can then search on any node. If you put a load balancer in between, users can be directed to whichever GSA is available. Now the one catch is if you purchase the Replica as a hot backup, then you can use it for high availability, but you can't use, and for ease of redundancy, but you can't use it for increased server capacity. If you're going to do that, you're going to have to purchase a separate GSA, but you have to pay full price for it. You can have one or more replicas. You can also support connectors, but if you're going to set up a mirroring environment, you have to have your connectors as off-board connectors. This may change in a future release, so check your documentation on releases. We also support distributed crawl and serve as well as unification. This is for handling larger corpuses where you go beyond that 30 million doc limit and you have to have multiple GSAs to fragment or shard the index. Then you can also have hot backups for each one of those shards of the index. We support query suggest, click boost, spell checker. These are the types of ongoing user interactions on the GSA. So the serve time data will also be replicated across. What's going to happen is the two GSAs are going to set up a private network, a VPN tunnel, if you will. This is going to be a high bandwidth connection. So it's highly recommended that you set these up in the same data center. If that's not possible, then at least have a 1 megabit line between the two because the bandwidth is going to be high. We'll set up a private IPsec tunnel. The GSAs must see each other's public IP address. We're going to set up and configure a private IP address on these GSAs, but the GSAs don't have to see that private IP address. So in this example, your primary has public IP address of 140.0.0.1, and the public IP address for this GSA is 210.0.0.1. Then the GSAs have to be able to perform DNS resolution and be able to see those IP addresses. We'll set up a private tunnel on 10.0.0.1 and 10.0.0.2, and we also include a secret so that the channel is encrypted and the data is encrypted. There's no security vulnerabilities. And the data will be transferred across ports 500 UDP and 51 for IP. So you have to make sure those ports are open. You have to have the same software version for the GSAs. So if you're on version 6.10 of one on the primary, you have to be on 6.10 of the Replica. You can be on different hardware versions, but the older version has to be the primary. So you want to check your hardware. Let's say this is a T1 and this is a T2. T2 is a newer version, so the T2 would have to be in the Replica. So how are you going to configure this? Well, first you configure everything on your primary. All your crawl patterns, all of your front ends, collections, people search, connectors, everything's set up on the primary, except the following. Kerberos, if you're using it, certificate X.509 certificates if you're using that, or SSL certificates, and the SAML provider. That's because these configurations are host specific. So you'll have to set them up on the Replica as well. To configure mirroring at a high level, we'll go to the replicas and we will pause the crawl there and reset the index. This prepares them to receive an index from the primary. On the primary, we'll configure the nodes and we'll apply those configuration changes. Then if you have connectors, you'll also add the replica IP addresses to the server.xml file. When you configure a connector to send a feed to the primary, that GSA's IP address gets stored in the server.xml config file of the connector. You have to also add your replicas so that authorization checks can be received from the connector coming from different GSAs. So let's take a look at how to set this up. I have two GSAs, GSA 11 and GSA 12. I'm going to set up the primary as GSA 11 and the replica as GSA 12. Initially, here's what's set up in crawl patterns for the replica. If I go to its search page and I search for thank you, I get one result. If I search for health or medical, I will not get any results. Health, medical, there's a painter's directory, Monet. I get no results. On the primaries crawl patterns, I've indexed all these directories, medical, health, and painters, so I should get search results. Medical, health, and Monet. Now I'm going to set up mirroring. On the replica node, I'm going to pause the crawl, and I will reset the index. This will take a few minutes, and we'll have to check the status to see when the index has been reset on this box before we configure mirroring on the primary. To check the status, you can go to Home, and here an index reset operation is in progress. When this is done, we'll see a change in that status. While we're waiting for the replica's index to be reset, we can go to the primary and start configuring mirroring. We'll go to GSA to the N, enable mirroring, and we'll configure our nodes, but we just won't apply the configuration settings yet. When you enable mirroring, you'll see that the primary, this node here, this GSA right here, is its host, its appliance ID and host IP address, and it's being set to the primary. All this is entered for you automatically. The only thing you might need to change is this private IP address. So we're going to put this on an address that doesn't conflict with any other GSAs in this network. I'll just make this simple. I'll just keep it 11. GSA 11, and I'll have to enter in an administrator user ID and password for this GSA. Save the changes, make sure it's the primary, and now I'll add another node. This time I'm going to add the replica, and I'm going to get the host, the appliance ID from the replica. It's under the license. One thing to check here to make sure your hardware versions are either the same or the older version is on the replica. You get the public IP address from the network settings on this GSA, or I could just ping it. And add a user ID and password for the administrator, and give it a private IP address that doesn't conflict with any other IP address on your network. I'll just keep it simple. I'll use the last 2 digits of my GSA number. Save the changes. Now the mirroring configuration is configured and set. You might want to just do a visual glance here to make sure everything looks right. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll go back to my replica and check to see if the crawling or the index reset is complete. Now index reset's still in progress, so I'm going to have to wait until this finishes. When my status shows crawl paused, then the index reset is complete. I'll go to status and reports on the replica, look at crawl diagnostics, and I shouldn't see any results here even when the default collection is selected. Now I can go to the primary, apply the configuration change, and now it's going to say it's waiting down here. It's going to take a little bit of time for this. What's happening is the private IP address, the private IP tunnels being set up with the replica. The configuration files are being moved over, and the index a copy of this primary's index is being migrated over to the replica. This can take several minutes in the case of a very simple index like mine, or it can take hours. So one thing you can do is you can go to the network diagnostics page here, and you can see the processes that are occurring across the top. The ping status was successful. Node configuration is in process. If it shows red, it doesn't necessarily mean that it actually has failed. It just means that it's in process and that there's yet more work to be done. If after a couple minutes this doesn't change, if after about 1 or 2 minutes this don't change to green, then you might have an issue with your configuration. Go back and double check and then reapply your configuration changes. Down here, we're going to see status. Here's the replica node indicated by its IP address, and you'll see the status for it's syncing the index. There was a creation time that was started. There's a transfer in progress. It's 100%, and here was the transfer speed. I suspect, since the tunnel's not up yet, that these numbers are a little premature. What we'll see is as the tunnel gets built, then those numbers will change. Okay, here's the tunnel has been successfully built. The two GSAs are now syncing up their configuration and their index. Some things to check on the replica. Notice that the URL patterns that are crawled have changed. This is part of the configuration change that's occurring. If you go to the status on the home page, you'll see that the crawl is still listed as paused. And that's going to change when the replication is complete. The crawl status will actually change to crawling. And all it's doing is replicating what it sees on the primary. It's not actively crawling in the background. When you go to the crawl status on the replica, you'll see that it is paused. Crawl diagnostics should show you nothing. Okay, now I'm on the primary. I see some activity going on. It's no longer listed as 100% complete, it's 67% complete. What's happened is this portion of the administration console page finally got its process to update. It finally occurred. And we see that we're exchanging data at about 7 kilobits per second. Now I'm at 100% complete. Notice that also my serving index has been completed as well. Back on the replica node, crawl status has been changed to running. Remember, this is not crawling, it's just replicating what's on the primary. And that's the setting on the primary. No crawl diagnostics available here, only a crawl diagnostics available on the primary. If I run a search on my replica for Monet, I get results. Medical, results. This is my replica node. If the primary goes down, you have a couple choices. One, you could try to fix the issue on the primary and bring it back up, and then that will continue crawling, pick up where it left off, and continue to push its updates and changes out to the replica. If, however, you find that there is a severe problem with the GSA, maybe you have to replace it, and you need to promote the replica to the primary in that process, what it'll do is it'll start to continue crawling where the primary left off. There may be some downtime with feeds. If you're pushing feed data to the primary and it's down, then some of that feed data may have not been indexed. So you need to resubmit your feed or handle that lost bit of data on the replica node. To promote the replica, you pause its crawl, disable replication, update the feeds and connectors, and wait 15 minutes for crawl diagnostics to return, and then click resume crawl. I'm going to show you how to do this. So on the replica, go to status and reports, pause the crawl, disable mirroring. You'll have to update any feeds or connectors pushing data, let them know to start pushing data to this GSA. Then you wait for about 15 to 30 minutes for crawl diagnostics to return, and then you click resume crawl. Crawl diagnostics looks like it's returned. Now I can resume my crawl. Now this search appliance actively switches into the crawling mode and starts fetching content. Now let's consider the slightly more complex scenario where we have not only GSA replication for failure, but also connector replication for failure. When we have a mirrored configuration, what we'll do is we'll set up load balancers in between the GSA and the users for serve time requests, and a load balancer between the GSAs and the connectors for serve time requests if there's security involved, right? So authorization requests have to go back out from the GSA to the connectors, and they have to be able to receive the requests from the GSAs. And there's a little bit of configuration to go to set this up. Let's take the crawling part first. We'll set up one connector to crawl content on the web server, and it will be actively crawling. This one will be set up, but traversal will be disabled. It'll just be sitting in a passive mode, waiting to be told to start crawling. We'll configure this connector to push its feed to this GSA, and that value, the IP address of the GSA, will be set in application context properties file. We normally don't have to mess with this, but if the primary GSA fails and the replica starts taking over as primary, then this feed will have to come into the application context properties file and change it to push content to this GSA. Now, if this connector fails, we'll have to come into the replica connector. We'll have to make sure that its application context properties points to the primary GSA. And if that GSA fails, we'll change the application properties in this connector to push content to this GSA. During network setup, we will also copy the state file from this as this connector processes content, and we'll copy that on a regular basis with a cron job. And then when this connector starts traversing, we will copy, just before it, we'll copy that state file over and start that connector. That way it can pick up crawling where this connector left off. At serve time, we need to make sure that authorization checks can go to the proper connectors. And this is a little simpler because what we can do is we can specify both connectors to receive requests from either GSA, and it doesn't matter. And they can do that at any time. And all we do is go into the server.xml file and add the replica IP address. We also have to consider, for using SharePoint, we have to replicate the H2 groups database for SharePoint. See the documentation for details on that. Some things to note: replication will not be instantaneous, so give it some time. No reports or diagnostics will be available on the replica. We saw that. And if the primary has premium support and both are down, make sure you reference premium support so that you get immediate action if your replica is active. That's it for setting up mirroring. As you've seen, it's pretty straightforward. It just takes some time. If you have to stop and troubleshoot and go back and check your configuration, you may even have to bring the mirroring configuration down and bring it and set it all back up again. For further details, check documentation.